Our mission today takes us deep into the strategic core of project management. We're not just, looking at schedules. We're really questioning the foundations of how time and value get assessed in these huge multi-million-dollar projects.
Yeah, and specifically, we're diving into critical path methodology, CPM, and this really interesting concept called drag duration.
It sounds technical, and it is, but the implications are massive.
And this is a pretty unique deep dive, actually, because the material we're working from gives us two angles. First, there's the actual debate, this really candid chat between two experts, Stephen DeVoe and someone named Marcus, wrestling with why project scheduling feels so stuck in the past.
Okay, experts debating the core ideas.
Right. But second, and this is unusual, we also have a detailed linguistic analysis of that conversation. It kind of maps out the effort it takes just to share these complex, cutting-edge ideas across language barriers.
So we're looking at what they said and how they managed to say it. That adds a whole other layer. It gives us context for the technical stuff, right? Seeing the human side, the commitment involved, especially when English isn't everyone's first language.
Exactly. It underlines the passion. And the core thing we're going to unpack from all this is, how do you, as someone managing projects, stop thinking about time buffers, slack, float, whatever you call it, is just like wiggle room in the schedule.
And start thinking about them differently.
Yeah, start treating them as actual, quantifiable, strategic assets. Drag duration, in their view, isn't just a number the software spits out. It's a kind of reserve that should be driving decisions about profit, resources, investment. It's a shift from just managing tasks to managing value.
Okay, task management versus value management. I like that frame.
Yeah.
So let's start with that unusual piece, the linguistic landscape. Tell us about the speakers themselves.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this linguistic analysis first. Feels like important context before we dive into drag duration itself. It tells us something about the people behind these ideas. Definitely. So if we look at speaker one, that's Stephen DeVoe. The analysis basically confirms, yep, totally fluent native English speaker, North American, likely.
Uses all the technical terms naturally.
Completely. Precise vocabulary, natural rhythm, uses connectors like a native speaker would. The report says there's basically zero interference from any second language. His error rate, grammar, usage combined is estimated at something like 2%, which is incredibly low.
So he's the linguistic anchor in this conversation.
Pretty much. He can navigate the really complex technical stuff without the language itself being a barrier.
Okay, but then speaker two, Marcus, is a different story.
A very different story. His English is clearly advanced, no question. He's having a high-level technical discussion. But the analysis points out definite L2 second language characteristics.
Like what? What does the source material show?
Well, there are examples of structural breaks, moments where you can almost hear the cognitive load, like he's searching for the right English phrase mid-sentence.
Any specific examples jump out?
Yeah, the report mentions him saying something like how to say elogios. Elogios is Portuguese.
Meaning praise or compliment, so a direct word borrowing.
Exactly. And it's not just single words. There are some phrasing things noted, like maybe slightly non-idiomatic ways of putting things. The analysis mentions phrases like, make something interesting in the CPM old traditional works, or a structural thing like saying there is CPM instead of maybe CPM exists or we have CPM.
Little tells that show English isn't his native tongue.
Right. And his estimated combined error rate reflects that it's much higher, maybe around 18%. The analysis suggests he's likely Brazilian or maybe Latino. The key point is he's dedicating significant mental energy just to have this conversation at this level on top of processing the complex subject matter itself.
Wow. And does the conversation itself acknowledge this?
It does, explicitly. Stephen DeVoe, speaker one, actually says at one point that the discussion is more of a chore and more work for Marcus because they're speaking English, DeVoe's native language. He even adjusts his pace sometimes.
That's quite telling. It shows a shared understanding of the effort involved.
It really does. And that shared effort, that willingness to push through the language barrier is why this linguistic context matters. It highlights just how important they think these ideas about CPM and drag duration are.
They wouldn't go to all that trouble if they didn't think the concepts were crucial, potentially game-changing.
Exactly. The effort itself speaks volumes about the perceived value of the knowledge they're trying to share. It sets the stage perfectly for understanding their frustration with the status quo in project management.
Right. It shows the passion driving them to challenge this inertia, the stagnation they see. Okay, so we've got this picture of intense effort just to communicate. What were they so fired up about communicating? You mentioned stagnation.
Yeah, that brings us right to the core problem identified by Marcus. He puts it bluntly. The main framework for project management, the critical path method, CPM, has seen, in his words, no progress since 1960s.
No progress since the 60s. That's a heavy charge. What exactly is CPM supposed to do, just as a quick reminder?
Sure. So traditional CPM, at its heart, is about sequencing. It maps out all the tasks in a project, figures out the dependencies, what has to finish before something else can start, and identifies the longest chain of these dependent tasks. That's your critical path.
And that path dictates the shortest possible time the whole project can take.
Exactly. It tells you which specific tasks have zero slack, zero buffer. If any task on that critical path slips, the whole project finish date slips.
That seems useful. So what's the problem? Where's the stagnation?
The problem is, while it's good at identifying that one longest path, it's not great at telling you much about the risk or impact of delays on other paths. Modern projects are complex, thousands of tasks.
Right.
So knowing the critical path is one thing. But what about a task that's not critical but only has, say, 2 days afloat? If that task slips by 3 days, it suddenly becomes critical or creates a new critical path. CPM doesn't really quantify that potential impact well.
It's sort of binary, either critical or not critical.
Pretty much. It doesn't easily tell you, okay, activity A has 20 days afloat, activity B has 10 days. If both slip by 5 days, which one hurts the end date more? CPM doesn't give a clear, quantified answer based on the pull on the final deadline.
Okay, I see the gap. It lacks nuance about risk across the whole project.
Precisely. And that's where Stephen DeVoe's work on calculating drag comes in. Marcus credits him directly, calls him the only one, the first person to bring something genuinely new and, crucially, profitable to the CPM old traditional works.
Drag duration. So what is drag, conversationally speaking? How does it fill that gap?
I think of it like this. Drag measures how much any given activity, whether it's on the critical path or not, is actually delaying the project's overall completion date.
Delaying the completion date, even if it has floats.
Yes. It quantifies the pulling force, the drag that activity exerts on the finish line. An activity might have float, meaning it could finish later without delaying its immediate successor, but it might still be the reason the entire project can't finish sooner. Drag measures that specific contribution to the project's duration.
Okay, so it's not just about sequence, it's about quantifying the impact of each task's duration on the final end date.
Exactly. And that quantification is the key. Because if you know Activity X is dragging your project finish date by 5 days, even though it has some float, you now have a reason to potentially spend money, resources to shorten Activity X. You can make a calculated decision.
Which you couldn't really do with traditional float because float doesn't tell you the cost of not finishing earlier.
Precisely. But as the sources show, getting this idea adopted faced, and still faces, huge resistance.
From who? Where did the pushback come from?
Well, the conversation points fingers at the big industry bodies. PMI, the Project Management Institute, and its PMBOK guide get called out for essentially not paying attention to what is new, really new, or profitable.
Ouch. The accusation is they're focused on standardization over innovation.
That's the implication Marcus makes, that the focus is on baseline certification, keeping everyone on the same basic page, rather than pushing the envelope towards strategies that actually improve profitability and manage risk better.
And did this resistance show up in the tools people use, the software?
Oh, definitely. Speaker one, DeVoe, talks specifically about his interactions with the makers of Spider Project, Vladimir and Alex Leschenko.
And Spider Project is?
He actually praises it. Calls it the best software package currently on the market for its scheduling power. High praise.
But there's a but.
There's a big but. He says that while Spider Project did start calculating drag duration, the number itself they resisted really collaborating or fully integrating the implications of drag, specifically the financial side, the calculation of what he calls drag cost.
So they calculated the drag number, but not what that drag was costing the project in terms of value.
That seems to be the core of his frustration. He says he felt they would have done some things differently, really focusing on how you monetize time. For Spider Project, it sounds like drag was maybe just another schedule metric. For DeVoe, drag is the key to unlocking financial decisions, risk reduction, strategic investment.
Okay, so that disconnect drag as a number versus drag as a financial lever seems central, and that leads right into this idea of float versus something else. Right? The split in thinking is the extra time, just flexibility, or is it something more strategic? This feels like the absolute heart of the discussion. Marcus apparently used the term hidden float, and DeVoe immediately jumped in. No, drag is not a float. Let's really unpack that. Why is drag not float?
Okay, yeah, this is crucial. To get why drag isn't float, we need to be super clear on what float is in traditional project management. There are usually two main types people talk about.
Right, there's total float.
Yep, total float or total slack. That's how much an activity can slide, delay from its earliest possible start, without pushing back the final project completion date. It's the buffer along a whole path of activities.
And the other one is free float.
Exactly. Free float or free slack. That's more about immediate flexibility. It's how much an activity can slip without delaying the very next activity that depends on it. It doesn't mess up the start time of its immediate successor.
Okay, so both total float and free float represent available time, a buffer you theoretically could use if needed.
Correct. And Marcus summarizes this perfectly as the standard sort of Western way of thinking about it. Float is something you have, and you can choose whether or not to use it. It gives you freedom, flexibility to reschedule or postpone if things go wrong, something that you have if you desire, as he put it.
It's scheduling flexibility. Got it.
Now, contrast that sharply with what Marcus describes as the Eastern, or specifically Soviet, way of thinking about project time and slack. This provides the background for why he links drag to a reserve.
How do they see it differently?
In that system, float wasn't really considered yours to spend freely. It wasn't flexibility. It was a reserve that absolutely had to be protected, maintained. The goal wasn't to use the float, but to get the work done fast as soon as possible, preserving that buffer. Time wasn't just flexible, it was a critical resource to be guarded.
Ah, okay. So less about freedom to delay, more about an obligation to protect the buffer by being efficient.
Exactly. And it was that concept, time as a guarded reserve, that clicked for Marcus when he encountered drag duration. He started thinking, okay, drag duration isn't like float that just exists. It reveals a potential reserve. It tells you, quantifiably, I know I can shorten my project. I know where the potential time savings are, in numbers, because of DeVoe's work.
So float is what you have if you don't act. Drag reveals the reserve you could gain if you do act.
Precisely. That's the leap. Drag duration points to a reserve that requires investment to actually realize. It's not free time you stumble upon. Marcus nails this distinction. It's not a free float, free in the case of cost, not in case of time. Accessing that reserve costs resources, money, effort.
So you don't get free flexibility like with traditional float. What you get is knowledge, specific knowledge about where spending money will buy back the most time.
Exactly. Float is about flexibility. Drag is about targeted optimization. It enables a deliberate, financially justified decision to shrink the project duration. And shrinking the duration inherently cuts down the project's exposure to risk. Things are less likely to go wrong in 70 days than in 100 days.
Right. DeVoe makes that comparison, doesn't he, between different schedule strategies?
He does. He contrasts, say, a risky 100-day schedule with absolutely no planned reserve versus maybe a 95-day schedule that has identified 5 days of strategic reserve you could potentially buy back. The 95-day one feels a bit safer.
But that's not the main point, is it?
No, the real strategic power move he highlights is aiming for something much more aggressive, like a 70-day schedule that has identified a whopping 30 days of potential reserve, quantified through drag analysis.
Now, hitting 70 days might seem unrealistic compared to 100.
Maybe. But by strategically attacking the activities with the highest drag, you've fundamentally shrunk the window where things can go wrong. Even if your compressed 70-day schedule slips, maybe it finishes in 78 days or 83 days, you're still way ahead of the original 100-day plan.
You've built in a massive safety margin by actively eliminating the quantified drag.
Exactly. The shorter schedule is the safety. DeVoe confirms this view. Drag is a way of building in more reserve and trying to avoid the drag costs of using that reserve and reducing risk. It flips the mindset from just hitting a deadline to maximizing the time saved before that deadline.
So if traditional CPM gives you the roadmap, drag duration basically highlights the shortcuts on that map and tells you exactly how much toll money you need to use them. It turns time into a commodity you can strategically buy.
That's a great way to put it. It provides the financial incentive and the precise leverage points for intervention.
Okay, so drag duration tells us where to invest to buy back time, creating this strategic reserve. But you mentioned resistance, the disconnect with software like Spider Project. Why wasn't this concept immediately embraced if it offers so much potential?
Well, according to the discussion, a lot of it boils down to a fundamental disagreement about the nature of investment itself. And this seems tied to differing views on value versus cost.
How so?
Speaker 1, DeVoe, suggests that the background of folks like the Lashchenkos at Spider Project, perhaps influenced by a Russian or Soviet perspective, leads them to see investment primarily in hard financial terms. Cost.
Cost being the objective price of things, labor, materials, equipment.
Exactly. Cost is something you can calculate very clearly, objectively. You know what a person-hour costs, what materials cost. It's tangible.
Okay, but what's the missing piece, according to DeVoe?
Value. He argues that focusing only on cost ignores the other side of the equation, value. And value, he says, is inherently very subjective.
Subjective how?
Well, what I value in a project outcome might be different from what you value, or what the end customer values, or what the engineer values. Maybe I value speed, you value quality, the customer values features. It's not a single objective number like cost often is.
Okay. So if value is subjective, how can you use it to justify objective costs? That seems like the hurdle.
Precisely. And DeVoe's answer is, you have to monetize that subjective value. You have to translate it into dollars or rubles or whatever currency you're using.
I'm a subjective feeling into a hard number.
Yes. If a project funder, like a client or your own company's leadership, is going to spend extra money, incur extra costs to get increased value, like finishing faster or getting more scope, that extra cost needs a clear financial justification. The increase in monetized value has to outweigh the increase in cost.
Can you give an example of how that monetization works?
He uses a really simple, effective analogy. Imagine you hire someone to build a garden for $1,000. For you to agree to that, your personal subjective value for that garden must be at least $1,001, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't pay. Your willingness to pay is the monetization of your desire.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, let's say the gardener offers to get it done 2 weeks earlier if you pay an extra $100 for more help or overtime. If you agree to pay that extra $100, you have just monetized the value of that specific 2 weeks. You've decided that having the garden 2 weeks sooner is worth at least $101 to you.
Ah, I see. The extra cost paid reveals the monetized value of the time saved.
Exactly. And that logic leads directly to the definition of drag cost.
Which is?
Drag cost is what you're losing in value by delaying the project. Simple definition, but profound implications. It reframes delay not just as a schedule slip, but as a direct financial loss.
It puts a price tag on procrastination, essentially.
Pretty much. He uses the garden example again, but adds context. Maybe you needed that garden finished 2 weeks early for your daughter's wedding reception plan there.
Okay, now the value of that time is skyrockets.
Immensely. Suddenly, paying that extra $100 to guarantee it's ready seems like a no-brainer. The value of having it ready for the wedding massively outweighs the cost. Conversely, the drag cost, the value you'd lose if it wasn't ready for the wedding, is huge. That's what justifies the investment to eliminate the drag.
And that translates directly to business decisions.
Absolutely. This is the language you need to talk to a CFO or a CEO. It lets you say, look, activity X currently has 5 days of drag. If we let that happen, the project finishes 5 days later, and based on our product launch window, that delay will cost us an estimated $50,000 in lost early adopter revenue. However, we can spend an extra $10,000 now on resources for activity X to eliminate that drag.
So you're making a clear ROI case for spending money to save time. Time becomes, as he says, trade-offable value with the cost of the resources.
Exactly. You're strategically trading cost for monetized value, which is embedded in time.
But how do you get that value into the system? If it's subjective, how does the software handle it? DeVoe seemed to think it wasn't that hard.
Yeah, he argues the implementation is actually not that complicated. His proposed solution is refreshingly straightforward.
What's the idea?
Basically, the project management software needs to allow the user, the project manager, the stakeholder, to input the value of time directly, linking it to the completion date.
So not some complex algorithm, just a user input field.
Essentially, yes. But a specific kind of input. You tell the software something like, okay, this project delivers its maximum value, let's say $1 million, if it's finished by September 1st. For every week it finishes later than that, the value drops by $50,000. For every week it finishes earlier, the value increases by $20,000.
You define the time value curve for that specific project.
Exactly. You provide the formula. Once the software has that formula, then it can calculate the drag cost automatically. If it sees an activity dragging the finish date from step 1st to step 8, it applies your formula and says, okay, that drag is costing you $50,000 in lost value.
And that number becomes the justification for spending money to reduce the drag. It connects the objective cost of resources to the now monetized subjective value of time.
Precisely. It bridges the gap. It flips the whole resource question on its head. Instead of asking, can we afford the resources to speed things up, you ask, Can we afford the drag cost of not speeding things up? It's a fundamental shift toward proactive, value-driven project management.
Okay, the logic seems compelling. Quantify drag, monetize the value of time, calculate drag costs, make informed investment decisions to optimize the schedule and reduce risk. It sounds like a powerful approach, yet the sources make it clear this hasn't exactly swept the industry. Why this struggle?
Yeah, despite the logic, adoption has been slow. Speaker one, DeVoe, doesn't mince words about the state of the profession. He argues project management is often done horribly badly.
Horribly badly, that's strong.
He uses this really provocative, memorable analogy. He says, a beaver that builds a dam on a river does a better job managing its project than many professionals handling multi-million-dollar initiatives.
Wow, a beaver. Why a beaver? What's the beaver doing right that humans aren't?
Think about it. The beaver implicitly understands its critical path. It needs the dam for survival, for its habitat, its food source. But more than that, the beaver manages its schedule and resources, gathering sticks, packing mud based on a clear, quantifiable value. Survival.
Okay.
If a beaver managed its dam project the way some large human projects are managed, maybe focusing only on an arbitrary deadline without constantly assessing the real risks and the value of getting it done efficiently. DeVoe jokes they would have died out of the gene pool 20 million years ago.
So the implication is we humans are often just managing schedules, ticking boxes, without a laser focus on the actual value being created or lost and the existential risks involved.
That seems to be his point, and he traces this failure back to education. He believes people just don't grasp these concepts of strategic reserve, monetized value, drag cost, because the standard project management training hasn't fundamentally changed since, well, the 1960s.
The curriculum is lagging behind the potential innovation.
Hugely lagging. And Marcus echoes this frustration with the institutional side of things. He specifically criticizes certification bodies, like PMI.
What was his take on PMI?
He described it, rather harshly, as operating at the lowest level of intelligence required for a standard. Again, strong words. But his point seems to be that standards bodies have to focus on the common denominator, the basics everyone needs for certification.
Which means they tend to promote the same old things, as he put it, for testing and networking, rather than championing disruptive, complex innovations like drag duration that might not be universally understood or applicable yet.
Right, it creates this built-in inertia. Marcus mentioned he's been fighting this himself, teaching the importance of drag duration since way back in 2010.
Teaching it himself.
Yeah, he said he actually obligates students in his courses to manually calculate the profitability of shortening a schedule by a week or two. He makes them do it in Excel because at the time, the standard software tools simply couldn't calculate drag cost. He forced the financial logic on them even when the tech wasn't there.
That's commitment. So is the tide finally turning? Are things changing?
It seems so, yes. The sources paint a picture of recent momentum. Speaker one talks about how his retirement plans got kind of derailed in a good way.
How?
Apparently, someone he knew, Mohammed Ajuruddin, who has a large LinkedIn following, thousands of people, started talking about DeVoe's work on drag duration.
Ah, social media bypasses the gatekeepers.
Exactly. DeVoe said he got something like 800 new followers almost overnight. LinkedIn became this key platform for spreading these niche, advanced ideas directly to practitioners, skipping the traditional channels.
Interesting. And did institutional support follow?
It did. Northeastern University started sponsoring webinars with him. And crucially, he mentions that now at least 2 or 3 other software companies are starting to build these concepts, drag cost, value into their products. The tools are catching up.
That's a big step. What about PMI, the body that was criticized earlier?
That's perhaps the most significant shift mentioned. A new president took over PMI, Pierre Lamont. And Lamont apparently posted a public message about the need for PMI to take a value-based approach to project delivery.
Value-based approach. That sounds like exactly what DeVoe and Marcus were arguing for.
It was music to DeVoe's ears. He'd actually left PMI years before out of frustration. But seeing that explicit shift in language from the top, acknowledging the importance of value, convinced him to rejoin. It signaled that the ideas were finally moving from the fringe into the mainstream discussion.
Wow, that's a turnaround. And DeVoe himself is still pushing hard.
Very much so. He emphasizes he's a teacher at heart. He's 76 now, he says, and he's doing a lot of this work webinars, presentations for organizations like PMI for free. His mission seems to be pure dissemination of these ideas he believes are critical.
Any recent examples of that?
Yeah, he had just completed the first part of a 4-part webinar series for PMI members when the source conversation happened. It was apparently a huge success, like 780 attendees, really high ratings. People are hungry for this stuff.
And what are the other parts of that series about?
Get this. The remaining parts focus specifically on the value breakdown structure, how you define value, and, critically, on drag cost. So PMI itself is now platforming the very concepts that represent the biggest leap beyond traditional CPM. The conversation has definitely shifted. #OUTRO. So when you pull it all together, this deep dive really shows that the biggest obstacle to running projects more profitably, more safely, isn't usually the technical complexity of scheduling itself. It's more fundamental. It's about how we philosophically understand and value time.
Right. Are we seeing time as just a buffer, just float we can burn? Or are we seeing it through the lens of drag duration as something else?
Exactly. Drag duration gives us the numbers to treat time not as that passive buffer, but as a tangible strategic reserve. A reserve that contains potential value, but unlocking that value requires deliberate, calculated investment.
And understanding that shift is huge for anyone listening who manages projects or makes decisions based on them. Knowing about drag, and crucially, drag cost, changes your role. You stop being just a scheduler focused on tasks and deadlines.
And
You become more of a strategist focused on creating and protecting value. It gives you the vocabulary, the financial language to talk to the CFO, to talk to executives, and make a clear case for spending resources smartly to eliminate quantified risk and capture much greater returns down the line.
It connects the project plan directly to the balance sheet. And that brings us back to that old Benjamin Franklin quote DeVoe mentioned, time is money.
Time is money, simple but powerful.
So if we accept that premise that the time taken by any project inherently has a value, and therefore a cost if it's delayed or unnecessarily long, it leaves us with a really pointed, provocative question for you, the listener, to think about.
What's the question?
What project management process, what software, what mindset are you currently using that fails to calculate the very real financial cost of not actively working to reduce your project schedule? What value are you leaving on the table by not knowing your drag cost?